What happens when one of the most respected members of the British royal family sits down for what should be a light-hearted late-night talk show appearance, only to find himself in the middle of the most explosive television moment in recent memory? Tonight, we dive into the shocking confrontation that left audiences stunned, producers scrambling, and Prince William storming off the Jimmy Kimmel live set in front of millions of viewers. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think really triggered this unprecedented royal meltdown. The studio lights were blazing as Jimmy Kimmel bounded onto his stage with his usual infectious energy. The audience was particularly electric tonight, knowing they were about to witness something special. Prince William, second in line to the British throne, was making a rare appearance on American late-night television to promote his latest environmental initiative. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome His Royal Highness Prince William," Jimmy announced with a flourish as the band struck up, and the prince walked out, waving politely to the enthusiastic crowd. The two men shook hands warmly as William took his seat in the guest chair, adjusting his perfectly tailored navy suit. The opening moments seemed perfectly cordial, exactly what viewers and producers expected from such a high-profile royal visit. "Your Royal Highness, thank you so much for being here tonight," Jimmy began, his trademark grin spreading across his face. "I have to say, this is pretty exciting for us Americans. We don't get actual royalty on the show very often." "Please, just call me William," the prince replied with his characteristic charm, that familiar smile that had endeared him to the public for decades. "And thank you for having me, Jimmy. I have to admit, I have been looking forward to this." "Well, I have been looking forward to it too, but I have to be honest, William. I have got some questions that maybe your usual interviewers do not ask," Jimmy said, leaning forward slightly with a mischievous glint in his eye. William shifted slightly in his chair, maintaining his composure but clearly picking up on something in Jimmy's tone. "I am sure I can handle whatever you throw at me, Jimmy. Fire away." "Okay, great. So first, let's talk about your environmental work, which is fantastic, by the way. But I have got to ask, how does it feel to lecture people about carbon footprints when you guys literally travel everywhere in private jets and helicopters?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. The audience fell silent, sensing the shift in atmosphere. William's smile remained, but something flickered behind his eyes. "Well, Jimmy, I think that is a bit of an oversimplification," William responded, his voice measured but with a slight edge. "The reality is that security requirements and official duties often dictate our travel arrangements. But we do make efforts to offset our carbon usage and promote sustainable practices wherever possible." Right, offset," Jimmy nodded, but his expression suggested he was not entirely satisfied with that answer. "But do not you think there is something a bit, I do not know, hypocritical about flying around in private jets telling regular people to drive less and eat less meat?" William's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I would hardly call it hypocritical, Jimmy. We use our platform to raise awareness about critical environmental issues. The impact of that message far outweighs any personal carbon footprint." "Okay, fair enough," Jimmy said, though his tone suggested he was just getting warmed up. "Let me ask you this then. Your family owns some of the most valuable real estate in the world, right? Castles, palaces, massive estates. Meanwhile, you have got a housing crisis in Britain with people sleeping on the streets. Does that ever keep you up at night in your palace?" The studio audience was completely silent now. This was not the usual softball celebrity interview they were accustomed to seeing on late-night television. William's media training was being put to the ultimate test. "The Crown Estate and the royal family's properties serve important constitutional and cultural functions," William replied, his voice remaining steady but growing noticeably cooler. "These are not personal assets that we can simply liquidate. They are held in trust for the nation and generate significant revenue for the treasury." "But you live in them, right?" Jimmy pressed. "I mean, you are not exactly roughing it. Kensington Palace, Anmer Hall, these are not exactly modest accommodations. Jimmy, I think you may be misunderstanding how the monarchy functions, William said, his diplomatic smile becoming more strained. These residences come with the role and the responsibilities. It is not as if we chose to live extravagantly for personal pleasure. Oh, come on, William, Jimmy said with a laugh that did not quite reach his eyes. You cannot seriously sit there and tell me you would choose to live in a two-bedroom apartment in Queens if you had the choice. The prince's composure was clearly being tested. That is hardly a fair comparison, is it? My living situation is determined by constitutional requirements and security needs, not personal preference. Constitutional requirements, Jimmy repeated, shaking his head slightly. You know what is funny about that? Your constitution, if we can even call it that, since you do not actually have one written down, basically says you guys are better than everyone else because of who your ancestors were. How is that not the definition of privilege? William's eyes flashed, and for the first time in the interview, his royal composure cracked slightly. I think you are being deliberately provocative now, Jimmy. The constitutional monarchy system has evolved over centuries and serves as a stabilizing force in British democracy. Stabilizing force? Jimmy nodded mockingly. Right. So when your family was covering up for Prince Andrew's connections to Jeffrey Epstein, was that stabilizing British democracy too? The audience gasped audibly. This had crossed a line that no one expected Jimmy to cross, especially not on live television. William's face went completely still, his jaw clenched tight. I think that is completely inappropriate and out of bounds, William said, his voice dropping to a dangerously low tone. That situation was handled appropriately by the relevant authorities. Was it, though? Jimmy shot back, clearly undeterred by the prince's obvious anger. Because from where I sit, it looks like your family closed ranks to protect a guy who was hanging out with a convicted sex trafficker. And then when it got too hot, you just shuffled him off to the side and hoped everyone would forget about it. You are way out of line here, Jimmy, William said, his royal composure completely evaporating now. You have no idea what you are talking about, and frankly, this is exactly the kind of tabloid journalism that destroys lives and families. Tabloid journalism? Jimmy laughed harshly. I am asking legitimate questions about accountability. If regular people had those kinds of connections, they would be in prison. But because your uncle is a prince, he gets to retire quietly to his estate. How is that justice? William stood up abruptly, his face flushed with anger. This interview is over. I came here in good faith to discuss important environmental issues, and you have turned this into a character assassination. Sit down, William, Jimmy said, his voice taking on a harder edge. We are not done here. Excuse me? William's voice was ice-cold as he remained standing, his hands clenched at his sides. Did you just order me to sit down? Jimmy leaned back in his chair with a smirk that was equal parts amused and antagonistic. Yeah, I did. This is my show, Your Highness, not your palace. Here, you are just another guest, and we are not finished with this conversation. The tension in the studio was palpable. Audience members were looking around at each other in shock, while the cameras continued rolling, capturing every moment of this unprecedented confrontation. Behind the scenes, producers were frantically debating whether to cut to commercial, but the sheer drama of the moment kept them frozen. I am not just another guest, William said, his voice rising slightly for the first time. I am a representative of the British Crown, and I will not be spoken to like some celebrity here to promote their latest movie. Oh, there it is, Jimmy said, pointing at him triumphantly. There is that royal arrogance we have all been waiting to see. You think you are better than everyone else because you won the genetic lottery and popped out of the right womb. News? Flash, buddy. Your bloodline does not impress me or most Americans. William's face went through several shades of red. You are being deliberately disrespectful and inflammatory. This is not journalism. This is a hit job." "A hit job?" Jimmy laughed loudly. "I am asking you questions that millions of people want answers to. You want to talk about disrespectful? How about your family taking hundreds of millions of pounds from British taxpayers every year, while people are choosing between heating their homes and feeding their kids? The sovereign grant is a tiny fraction of what the monarchy brings into the British economy through tourism and soft power," William shot back, his diplomatic training warring with his rising anger. "We more than pay our way." "Tourism," Jimmy scoffed. "You know what would bring in more tourism? Opening up all those palaces and castles as museums instead of keeping them as your private playgrounds. France figured that out after they chopped off their royal family's heads." The audience gasped again at the implied threat. William's security detail, who had been standing discreetly off camera, took a step forward, but William held up a hand to stop them. "Are you threatening me on live television?" William asked, his voice deadly quiet. "I am making a historical observation," Jimmy replied coolly. "The French people got tired of supporting a parasitic aristocracy, and they did something about it. Maybe the British people will too, eventually." "You are out of your mind," William said, shaking his head in disbelief. "Absolutely out of your mind. I came here to discuss climate change and environmental protection, and you have turned this into some bizarre Republican manifesto." "Republican manifesto?" Jimmy repeated with mock surprise. "Is that what you call it when someone questions why we should bow down to people whose only qualification for power is that their great-great-great-grandfather killed more people than the other guy's great-great-great-grandfather? That is a grotesque oversimplification of 1,000 years of British history," William replied, his voice rising again. "The constitutional monarchy has provided stability and continuity through world wars, economic crises, and social upheaval." "Stability? For who?" Jimmy fired back. "For you guys living in palaces? Because I have got news for you, William. Regular British people have been through plenty of upheaval while you have been sitting pretty in your castles. The miners' strikes, the economic crashes, the austerity measures, none of that touched your family, did it?" "You have no idea what you are talking about," William said, his composure completely shattered now. "My family has served this country through every crisis. My grandmother lived through the Blitz. My father has dedicated his entire life to public service." "Public service?" Jimmy laughed bitterly. "Is that what you call ribbon-cutting and charity? Galas? Your idea of public service is showing up to events where people have already done all the real work, smiling for photos, and then going home to your palace." "I have spent years working as an air ambulance pilot," William said, his voice cracking slightly with emotion. "I have served my country in ways you could never understand." "Oh, the helicopter pilot thing," Jimmy nodded dismissively. "Yeah, that was cute PR. How long did that last? A couple years? And then it was back to the royal bubble, right? Back to having people bow and scrape and call you Your Royal Highness while you lecture them about their carbon footprints." William was visibly shaking with rage now. "You are completely ignorant about what my life actually involves. The work I do, the causes I support, the responsibilities I carry." "Responsibilities?" Jimmy shook his head. "The only responsibility you have is to not embarrass your family too badly while you live off the taxpayers. And honestly, you are not even doing that very well right now." "How dare you?" William said, taking a step toward Jimmy's desk. "How dare you sit there and diminish everything I have tried to accomplish, everything my family has done for this country?" "What have you accomplished?" Jimmy asked, spreading his hands wide. "Seriously, name one thing you have personally accomplished that could not have been done by someone else who actually earned their position instead of inheriting it." William stood there for a moment, his mouth opening and closing like he could not find the words. The cameras captured every second of his struggle, his face cycling through anger, frustration, and something that looked almost like hurt. "You know what?" he finally said. his voice barely controlled. This is exactly why the American experiment will ultimately fail. You have no respect for tradition, no understanding of duty, no appreciation for the things that actually hold a society together. The American experiment? Jimmy's eyebrows shot up. The American experiment that kicked your ancestors out and built the most powerful nation in human history? That American experiment? Built on slavery and genocide, William shot back, clearly losing all sense of diplomatic restraint. At least our system evolved gradually instead of being born in blood and exploitation. The studio fell completely silent. Even Jimmy seemed taken aback by the prince's words. The cameras kept rolling as William realized what he had just said. On American television. Did you just call America a nation built on slavery and genocide? Jimmy asked quietly, his voice dangerous. William's face went pale as the full weight of his words hit him. That is not, I mean to say. No, no, Jimmy said, holding up a hand. You said it. You came on American television and called our country a nation built on slavery and genocide. To an American audience. In an American studio. I was responding to your attack on British institutions, William said weakly, clearly realizing he had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. My attack? Jimmy's voice was rising now too. I asked you legitimate questions about your privilege, and you responded by insulting the entire foundation of American democracy. On my show. In my country. William looked around the studio, perhaps finally realizing the magnitude of what had just happened. The audience was staring at him in stunned silence. His security team looked uncomfortable, and the cameras were capturing every moment of his visible panic. I think, he said slowly, I think I should go. Yeah, Jimmy said, his voice cold as ice. I think you should too. William turned toward the stage exit, but Jimmy was not done with him yet. Hold on there, Your Royal Highness, Jimmy called out, his voice dripping with sarcasm. You do not get to insult my country and then just walk away. Turn around. William stopped mid-step, his shoulders tensing. Slowly, he turned back to face Jimmy, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. What more could you possibly have to say? I want an apology, Jimmy said, standing up from behind his desk for the first time in the interview. You just called America a nation built on slavery and genocide on live television. I want you to apologize to every American watching this show. I will not apologize for stating historical facts, William replied, his voice shaking with anger. Your country does have a complicated past, just as every nation does. Historical facts? Jimmy's voice was incredulous. You think you can come into my studio, onto my show, and lecture Americans about our history? Where do you get off? I get off on being educated about world history instead of living in some fantasy bubble where America is the greatest nation that ever existed, William shot back, completely abandoning any pretense of diplomatic restraint. The audience was now actively murmuring, some people booing, others looking around in shock. This had gone far beyond anything anyone could have anticipated. Fantasy bubble? Jimmy was walking around his desk now, approaching William directly. Let me tell you something about fantasy bubbles, Prince. You live in actual castles paid for by other people's taxes. You have servants who probably wipe your ass for you. You have never worked a real job in your entire life, and you want to talk to me about fantasy bubbles? I have worked, William said, his voice cracking. I served. In the military, I worked as a pilot. Playing dress-up soldier for a few years and then flying a helicopter as a publicity stunt is not work, Jimmy fired back. That is rich kid cosplay. Real work is getting up at 5 in the morning to flip burgers for minimum wage so you can pay rent on a studio apartment. Real work is having 3 jobs just to afford health insurance. You would not last 5 minutes in the real world. You do not know anything about my life, William said, his voice almost pleading now. You do not know the pressures, the responsibilities, the sacrifices. Sacrifices? Jimmy laughed harshly. What sacrifices? You sacrificed what exactly? Your privacy? Boo freaking who. You know what real people sacrifice? Time with their families because they are working 60-hour weeks. Their health because they cannot afford medical care. Their dreams because they are too busy trying to survive. This is pointless, William said, turning again toward the exit. I am not going to stand here and be lectured about sacrifice by someone who tells jokes for a living. Someone who tells jokes for a living? Jimmy's voice went up an octave. I worked my way up from nothing. I started doing stand-up in dive bars for $5 a night. I earned everything I have. You were born into wealth and privilege, and you act like that makes you superior to people who actually had to work for their success. William whipped around, his face flushed red with rage. You think this is easy? You think being born into this family is some kind of gift? Every single thing I do is scrutinized, criticized, picked apart by people like you who have never had to live under that kind of pressure. Poor little prince, Jimmy said mockingly. It must be so hard living in palaces and having people bow to you. My heart bleeds for your struggle. You are impossible, William said, his voice breaking slightly. Absolutely impossible. This whole thing has been a setup from the beginning, has it not? You never intended to have a real conversation about environmental issues or anything substantive. You just wanted to humiliate me on television. I wanted to have an honest conversation, Jimmy replied, his voice still angry but slightly more controlled. But you cannot handle honesty because you have been surrounded by yes-men and sycophants your entire life. The moment someone challenges you, the moment someone refuses to kiss your royal ass, you fall apart. I am not falling apart, William said, though his voice suggested otherwise. I am simply refusing to participate in this charade any longer. Then leave, Jimmy said, gesturing toward the exit. Go back to your palace and complain to your staff about how mean the American comedian was to you. I am sure they will all nod and agree and tell you how right you were. William stared at him for a long moment, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. The entire studio was silent except for the hum of the cameras and the distant sound of traffic outside. You know what the really sad thing is? William said finally, his voice quiet but still audible through his microphone. I actually believed we could have a meaningful dialogue. I thought Americans were better than this. Americans are better than this, Jimmy replied. We are better than bowing down to people who think they are special because of who their great-grandfather was. We are better than pretending that hereditary privilege is somehow noble or worthwhile. That is exactly why we kicked your family out in the first place. William's face went completely white. For a moment it looked like he might say something else, might make one final attempt to salvage the situation. Instead he reached up and unclipped his microphone, letting it fall to the floor with a sharp crack that echoed through the studio. This interview is over, he said, his voice barely above a whisper but somehow carrying to every corner of the room. Yeah, it is, Jimmy replied, watching as William walked toward the stage exit. And do not let the door hit you on the way out. Your Royal Highness. William paused at the edge of the stage, his hand on the curtain. For just a moment he looked back at Jimmy, at the audience, at the cameras that had captured every second of his public humiliation. His mouth opened as if he might say something, offer some final retort or attempt at dignity. Instead, he simply shook his head and disappeared behind the curtain. Jimmy stood alone on the stage for a moment, the studio silent except for the whispered conversations of shocked audience members. Finally, he walked back to his desk and sat down, looking directly into the camera. Well, he said, his voice still slightly breathless from the confrontation. That happened. We are going to take a quick commercial break, and when we come back, we will have some music to help everyone calm down a little bit. As the cameras cut away and the commercial break began, the full magnitude of what had just occurred began to sink in. Prince William, second in line to the British throne, had just walked off the set of Jimmy Kimmel Live after one of the most explosive television confrontations in recent memory. The story was already spreading across social media, with clips of the argument being shared thousands of times per minute. The phrase Prince William Kimmel was trending worldwide within 30 minutes of the incident. News outlets around the globe were scrambling to provide coverage of the unprecedented royal meltdown. But perhaps most importantly, the confrontation had exposed something deeper about the tensions between Old World privilege and New World democracy, between inherited power and earned success, between the reverence for tradition and the demand for accountability. What started as a simple late night talk show appearance had become a cultural moment that would be analyzed, debated, and remembered for years to come. And it all happened because two men from very different worlds refused to back down when their fundamental beliefs about power, privilege, and respect were challenged. So what do you think really pushed Prince William over the edge? Was it Jimmy's relentless questioning about royal privilege, the attacks on his family, or that final insult about America kicking out the British? Let me know in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more incredible stories like this one.